Hello there everyone, and welcome back to my channel.
Mr. Backwards.
So it's been a while since I posted again, but if you want to get into the details of where I've been the last 7 months, that sounds so bad. If you want to get into the details of where I've been the last 7 months, at the same time that I'm uploading this video, I will be uploading a life update video in which you can see what I've been doing, what jobs I've switched to and from, what I was doing during COVID, and where I am now, because this is clearly not the same place that I was recording videos before, because I have moved, and like I said, I will get into all that into my life update video. But for people who aren't interested in that, I totally respect that. You just want the Loch Ness Monster. I'm here for that. That is what this video is. So if you don't care about my life or my updates, you just want to know about the Loch Ness Monster, that's totally cool. That is what this video is for, and that is why the life update video is a separate video. So let's get into this video. So if you are new to my channel, my name is Ben Burnell. I am a professional actor living in Vancouver, and I like creepy, gross, and mysterious things. If you want to know what I'm up to day to day, I post quite a bit on my Instagram, more so than my Twitter, but I do have a Twitter as well. So if you want to follow me, both of those are under my name, just Ben Burnell with a Y, not a U. So originally this Loch Ness Monster video wasn't going to be the more or less complete history of the Loch Ness Monster. It was just going to be about the debunked iconic Nessie photo. But when I asked people if they preferred the short or the longer videos that I make, a lot of people, actually everybody who answered said that they liked the longer videos. So rather than just doing a short video on just the debunked photo, I thought I would just do the complete Nessie and really take my time with writing the script and filming and editing it, just to get back into the swing of things after my big Halloween Week series, and also after being gone and not editing and doing anything for 7 months. So Nessie, or the Loch Ness Monster, is the name given to a creature that is supposed to dwell within the Loch Ness in Scotland. Loch is just the Scottish word for lake, and Loch Ness is located in the Scottish Highlands. According to Scottish folklore, as well as in recent sightings, Nessie is supposed to be a very large aquatic-looking reptile with a long neck and often with humps along its back that protrude from the water. Belief in this supposed Loch Ness Monster go from people who completely believe in its existence and are going about trying to prove that it's there.
There's something in Loch Ness that shouldn't be there.
Versus people who believe it's all just misidentification and wishful thinking. It's been a creature of controversy since its very first sighting. The very first account of what can be identified as a possible Loch Ness Monster sighting is actually in the Life of St. Columba. This was back in the 6th century AD, or the long-forgotten year of 565. Year 565. That just sounds weird to say. The Life of St. Columba is a book that recounts the life of an Irish abbot and missionary who is now credited with spreading Christianity across what is now Scotland. According to the book The Life of St. Columba, during his travels, St. Columba came across a village where he found people burying the body of a man near the River Ness. The locals told St. Columba that the man had been swimming in the River Ness when he was attacked by a, quote, water beast and dragged into the water. St. Columba wanted to help the locals and also see this water beast for himself, so he sent one of his followers to swim in the river to hopefully attract the water beast. Apparently it worked. The water beast approached the follower as he was swimming in the river, and St. Columba apparently made the sign of the cross and said, "Go no further, do not touch the man, go back at once." I went to Catholic school. The beast stopped suddenly, as if it had been, quote, pulled back with ropes, and then it just fled. St. Columba's followers, as well as the local residents, gave thanks for what they believed to be a miracle. So that is believed to be the first documented sighting of what can be attributed to a Loch Ness Monster encounter. What's believed to be the first modern documented Loch Ness Monster sighting was by D. Mackenzie in either 1871 or 1872. Mackenzie was a man who lived in the small Scottish village of Balnain. Mackenzie didn't talk about the Loch Ness Monster sighting that he had until 1934, when Loch Ness Monster sightings were becoming more accepted in the public eye, most likely because he didn't want to face public ridicule being the only guy claiming to see this big aquatic reptile in the Loch Ness back in 1871 or 1872. Mackenzie reported seeing an object or animal resembling a log that was, quote, wriggling and churning up the water. The object moved slowly at first, and then it suddenly sped up and disappeared underwater. As far as I can tell, there aren't any documented, and documented being the key word here, documented sightings between the Life of St. Columba and D. Mackenzie's sighting. Of course, that doesn't mean there wasn't any, that's why the key word there being documented. There could of course be documented sightings written down in diaries or journals that we haven't found yet, or just passed by word of mouth, or just not spoken about at all. So there doesn't mean there wasn't any sightings, if there is a Loch Ness Monster, let's be objective here. However, skeptics do use this gap in sightings as a big plot hole in Nessie's existence. So when did the Loch Ness Monster first start gaining notoriety? The sensation seems to be linked to an article published on May 2nd of 1933. The article was written by Alex Campbell for the magazine Inverness Courier. This article detailed a sighting by Aldi McKay, who was a water law enforcement officer for the Loch Ness. Aldi described seeing a large beast or whale-like fish on the Loch Ness. Aldi talked about how the creature had a body the size of a whale and she saw it rolling about in the water on April 15th of 1933. It was in this article that the first time the word monster was applied to the creature that was being seen in the Loch Ness. This is an excerpt from the article republished in 2017 of Aldi's sighting. Quote, "The creature disported itself, rolling and plunging for fully a minute, its body resembling that of a whale, and the water cascading and churning like a simmering cauldron. Soon, however, it disappeared in a boiling mass of foam. Both onlookers confessed that there was something uncanny about the whole thing, for they realized that here was no ordinary denizen of the deep because, apart from its enormous size, the beast, in taking the final plunge, sent out waves that were big enough to have been caused by a passing steamer." On August 4th of 1933, the Inverness Courier published yet another alleged sighting of this monster. This one was by a Londoner named George Spicer, who was actually the head of a firm of tailors, and he not only saw this himself, but his wife also witnessed this. Spicer and his wife saw what he described as the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I've ever seen in my life, slowly moving across the road towards the Loch Ness with an animal in its mouth. George Spicer described this creature as having a long neck which moved up and down in the manner of a scenic railway. He described the body as fairly big with a high back, but if there were any feet, they must have been of the web kind. And as for a tail, I cannot say, as it moved so rapidly. And when we got to the spot, it had probably disappeared into the loch. So these two pretty much back-to-back sightings from two credible witnesses, a water law enforcement officer and the head of a firm of tailors, was just the kind of credibility that people needed to get interested in this Loch Ness Monster. The Inverness Courier, whether they wanted to or not, became the mouthpiece for all these alleged sightings that were now finally coming to the surface. Anonymous letters started flooding towards the Inverness Courier, both of sightings that had happened on land, like George Spicer, as well as sightings in the water, like Aldi McKay.
The story spread like wildfire, and an army of journalists descended on the loch.
These weren't just detailing recent sightings either. The sensation finally gave people the confidence to come forward about sightings they'd had years before, or sightings that their parents had told them about, or their grandparents, or their brothers, or sisters, or friends. This, of course, included D. Mackenzie, who finally came forward with his report from the 1870s. The sensation eventually reached widespread media, where it was described as a monster fish, a sea serpent, and even a dragon. Eventually, however, the official title finally settled on the Loch Ness Monster. Here's another one of the most interesting sightings that I could find. On January 5th of 1934, a man named Arthur Grant alleged to have nearly hit the monster while driving his motorcycle at 1 in the morning. Similarly to George Spicer's sighting, when the creature saw Arthur Grant, it quickly crossed the road and disappeared into the loch. Grant quickly dismounted his motorcycle and tried to follow the monster to see where it had gone, but he could only see ripples on the surface of the lake where it had disappeared underwater. Grant described the creature as having a small head and a long neck. Arthur Grant was actually a veterinary student, and he said that the Loch Ness Monster appeared to him to be a cross between a seal and a plesiosaur. A plesiosaur is an extinct species of aquatic dinosaur, but I'll get more into that when I start talking about what the Loch Ness Monster potentially could be. Arthur Grant actually drew this picture of the creature he saw that night. Maurice Burton, a zoologist, examined this drawing that Grant had created and also took into account the behavior of the creature as described by Grant, and said that most likely what Arthur Grant had seen was an otter. Paleontologist named Darren Naish has also given his opinion on what Grant saw. Darren Naish said that Grant most likely either saw a seal or an otter, and due to the low light, he either misidentified it or he exaggerated what he saw, either for attention or to keep the media sensation of the Loch Ness Monster going. But how could a veterinary student mistake an otter for a plesiosaur? It was during this media frenzy that the most famous and at the time most credible piece of evidence was taken, the surgeon's photograph. When anyone thinks of the Loch Ness Monster, this is almost always the picture that comes to mind. It is the most used picture of Nessie that is used in news articles, magazines, pop culture, everything. This is the Nessie photo. The photo was taken in 1934 by a gynecologist named Robert Kenneth Wilson. It was published in the Daily Mail on April 21st of 1934, and at the time it was the only photo of Nessie's head and neck. Every other photo alleged photo was just of humps in the water, allegedly the creature's back, which could be easily mistaken as a log, but a head and neck? That's a more credible piece of evidence. Wilson didn't want his name attached to the photograph or the media frenzy involving the Loch Ness Monster, so that's why it's known as the surgeon's photograph and not Robert Kenneth Wilson's photograph. The story behind the photo was that Wilson was looking out at the loch when he saw the creature, quickly grabbed his camera and managed to snap 4 photos, only 2 coming out semi-clear. The first photo shows a small head and a long neck, and that is the picture that most people recognize as the Nessie photo, or the surgeon's photograph. The second photo allegedly shows the creature's head and neck in more of a diving position, but I can't find this photo either because of copyright issues or because it wasn't published due to the former photograph being more clear and therefore more publishable. Right away, the surgeon's photograph had polarizing opinions. Many people believed that this was hard evidence of something monstrous living in the Loch Ness, while other people just believed it was either fake or, again, misidentification. Debunkers thought the photo was potentially a bird, an otter, a seal, a boat, or just a piece of driftwood. For 60 years, people were going back and forth on this photo. Multiple people try to dispute it in all different ways, based on the size of the creature, based on blemishes in the negative, based on the creature compared to the coast in the background of the uncropped version, all kinds of things.
What some of the Nessie authors had interpreted as waves were actually ripples. Just looking at the photograph, I just thought, well, this is something that isn't more than a foot high.
However, it was in 1999 that the real story behind the photograph became known in the book Nessie, the surgeon's photograph exposed. The creature in the photo with its head and neck protruding from the water was in fact a modified toy submarine. This modified submarine was built specifically for this hoax by Christian Sperling at the request of Marmaduke Wetherall. Christian Sperling was the son-in-law of Marmaduke Wetherall, and Wetherall already had a bit of a reputation regarding the Loch Ness Monster, and it wasn't a positive one. Wetherall had been publicly ridiculed by the Daily Mail for Nessie footprints that he found that were quickly exposed as a hoax. To get back at the Daily Mail for publicly ridiculing him, Marmaduke Wetherall came up with this elaborate plot to come up with a hoax that wouldn't be so quickly disproven, as well as to make money off of the paper that had, in his opinion, slandered his name. He had a whole little team in on this. He had his son-in-law, Christian Sperling, who was a sculpture specialist who obviously sculpt their fake monster. He also had his own son, Ian Wetherall, in on the hoax, who bought the material for their model. And he wouldn't be added in until the very end, but it was Robert Kenneth Wilson who eventually took credit for this photo. So there was a team of 4 men in on this hoax. So they started, as I mentioned, with just a simple toy submarine that Sperling eventually added model clay to create the head and neck that we all know in that iconic photo. They first tested their model in a local pond, and when they were satisfied that it looked believable in photographs and that it wouldn't sink, they brought their fake Nessie home to her loch. It was actually Ian Wetherall who took the 4 photos, and when the group heard approaching water law enforcement officers, Marmaduke quickly sank their little model with his foot, and apparently it's still in the loch to this day, just sitting at the bottom somewhere. Ian took their photographic plates to a friend of his, a respected gynecologist and surgeon named Robert Kenneth Wilson. Dr. Wilson apparently went along with this hoax because he appreciated a good joke and probably didn't expect it to turn into a 60-year-long worldwide media sensation.
Coming from so professional a man, with such unimpeachable credentials, the startling photograph had to be true. It established the Loch Ness Monster as a worldwide phenomenon.
Dr. Wilson took the photos to the Daily Mail, who happily paid the man for these photos, and then announced to the world that the Loch Ness Monster now had credible photographic evidence. Even though this piece of evidence is now debunked, the surgeon's photograph did bring forth one of the most widely believed theories about Nessie's true identity: a plesiosaur, just like Arthur Grant compared her to all those years ago. This, like everything else regarding Nessie, has people who 100% believe it and people who completely dismiss it. There are plenty of eyewitnesses who describe something the size and shape of a plesiosaur lurking below and above Loch Ness.
Their most signature feature was their long necks, spanning half the length of their body.
And it's not like supposedly extinct prehistoric species haven't been rediscovered by modern science before. I'm not even talking about the iconic frill shark, which of course is a species of shark that was supposedly long extinct but was then found alive and well in our modern oceans. I'm talking about the coelacanth fish. This species of fish, okay, was alive 360 million years ago and was found alive in the ocean in 1938 just off the coast of South Africa.
Are you getting
This fish, okay, was alive and swimming around the oceans before dinosaurs even showed up in the fossil record. I need you to understand something. This species of fish is so ancient that it could be related to the first creatures to walk on land. This old.
Did you know this fish is more closely related to mammals like you and other tetrapods than it is to other fishes?
They supposedly went extinct 80 million years ago, back when the dinosaurs were still in their prime. It's not believed that the coelacanth fish is the true identity of the Loch Ness Monster, but its rediscovery gave new fire to the plesiosaur theory. If this fish that supposedly died before the dinosaurs is still around, why not an aquatic dinosaur? People who discredit the plesiosaur theory say that if Nessie were a very large aquatic dinosaur, she would be spotted multiple times a day. Despite being aquatic reptiles, plesiosaurs didn't have gills, so they would have to surface frequently for air. Given that there can't just be one or two of these creatures to sustain a species for so long, you would surely have a lot more credible and photographic evidence of all these creatures surfacing for air all day long. Even with the eyewitnesses who report seeing something like a plesiosaur surfacing for air, what they describe doesn't line up with plesiosaur anatomy. Many eyewitnesses describe seeing something almost identical to the surgeon's photograph, a long neck protruding from the water with a small head on top. But plesiosaurs actually couldn't get their heads that far above the water, their necks just weren't flexible enough.
The bones of the neck interlock, and there are tall spines on top of them, so that the neck can't go straight out of the water.
Another hole in the plesiosaur theory is that until relatively recently, there was no Loch Ness. The long, deep shape of the loch was created when the continents collided and created what is now Scotland. Until around 11,000 years ago, there was no lake in this massive fissure. It was actually a giant glacier that didn't melt until the end of the last ice age. So, how could something that supposedly died 65 million years ago end up in a lake that didn't even exist until 10,000 years ago? Well, there's actually a theory about that too. So it goes like this. At the end of the last ice age, when all these massive glaciers were melting and created what is now Loch Ness, it's possible that the ocean level rose and the level of Loch Ness rose high enough that briefly the ocean and Loch Ness merged.
A flood came from here, a valley named Glenroy, 20 miles south of Loch Ness. These ancient shoreline markings prove it was once full of water.
So if plesiosaurs were alive in the ocean at that time, and given how little we actually know about the ocean, that's always a possibility, that would have been their window of opportunity to get into the Loch Ness, when the ocean and the Loch Ness were the same body of water. So when sea levels fell again and the ocean and Loch Ness once again became separate bodies of water, a small pod of plesiosaurs may have ended up stranded in the lake. However, soil samples taken from the bottom of the lake in 1994 prove that this is an unlikely theory. Soil and rock at the bottom of the lake show the history of the loch dating back thousands of years. It's even possible to see the effects of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, but what isn't seen is there ever being a high level of salt water in the freshwater lake. However, there is a small channel of water that feeds the lake from the ocean, and this is known as the River Ness. This is the same river that St. Columbia allegedly saw the water beast in 565. The year 565, that just sounds so weird. However, given how small and narrow this river is, if there were giant plesiosaurs traveling up and down the channel, then there would probably be more sightings. Especially in recent years, given that people are actually actively searching for this creature now. However, there are still bits of evidence that people haven't been able to completely debunk, even in recent years. Few pieces of evidence are as compelling as this photo taken in the early 1970s. A lot of people cite these underwater photos as proof of Nessie's existence. However, Adrian Shine isn't so easily convinced.
Science needed more evidence before rewriting the history books.
He's been theorizing what Nessie could be for over 30 years. Adrian Shine has been looking at the facts of Loch Ness to see if the ecosystem could support not just one Loch Ness monster, but a large enough population to sustain the species for hundreds of years of sightings. The first thing Adrian looked for wasn't for the monster. It was for the monster's food source. He looked for a high population of zooplankton, a high enough amount to support the amount of fish a Loch Ness monster colony would need to survive. Does that make sense? So basically, instead of looking for the ever-elusive monster at the top of the food chain, Adrian started his search at the bottom. The bottom is actually one step below plankton. It starts with green algae. Green algae is the primary source of food for zooplankton, and the simplest way to see if there was enough green algae to support a high population of zooplankton was to see if the conditions of the lake were ideal for green algae to even grow in.
What were the temperatures telling us? What was the environment itself telling us about what people were seeing?
A freshwater zoologist named David Martin tested the conditions of the lake to see how far below the surface of the water sunlight was able to penetrate. Green algae needs a high amount of sunlight to survive, but just 9 feet below the 750-foot deep lake, sunlight was almost completely lost. It's estimated that based on how much food there is available for the fish living in the Loch Ness, the lake could only support about 17 to 24 tons of fish, which, based on the size of the lake, isn't a lot. This amount of fish would only be able to support around 10 predators of Nessie's supposed size of around 500 pounds. This just isn't enough individuals to breed multiple generations, enough to sustain a species. There would need to be, at minimum, 30 to 40 individuals of a species to keep the genetic variation wide enough to make breeding multiple generations even possible. Sonar has started being used to map the bottom of the Loch Ness, and even on sonar scans, there's not a lot of fish showing up.
And that's where you've got to try and find something in there.
And it's just not realistic to send a team of divers into the Loch Ness to search every nook and cranny for Nessie's den. The thick peat moss that makes it difficult for sunlight to penetrate the water also makes it very difficult for divers to see. That, and there's 263 billion cubic feet of water to search. But even though sonar is being used to map out the lake, the possibility of the monster swimming below the boat just at that very moment is pretty low. Again, 263 billion cubic feet of water. Sonar has a lot of limitations.
Its range is relatively short, and rather like shining a giant flashlight into the loch, only creatures crossing the beam would be visible.
Despite sonar's limited capabilities, it hasn't stopped people from using it to try and get a glimpse of the elusive monster. Operation Deep Scan in 1987 is the biggest large-scale sonar search of the loch to date. Boats were deployed across the entire width of the Loch Ness, each one equipped with sonar. This means that this particular search has been the most comprehensive sonar search ever done of the loch to date. And they quickly made a discovery that made headlines.
The team of scientists said tonight they'd made sonar contact with a large unidentified object. They described it as of unusual strength and size.
Excited, the team returned to rescan where the object had been located, but it was quickly determined that it was just a piece of debris on the bottom of the lake. Come on, guys! However, the scan did turn up 3 other large-scale objects that still remain unidentified.
Adrian Shine, the leader of Deep Scan, is still a skeptic.
We've wondered whether they could have been seals. Seals get into the loch. They were of about that magnitude.
So, although there remains to be 3 unidentified anomalies, Operation Deep Scan didn't bring back any hard evidence of the Loch Ness Monster. Believers believe that's just because of sonar's limitations. Nessie's lair is believed to hide somewhere below the 700 feet of water and peat moss. Believers of the Loch Ness Monster theorize that there are caves and tunnel systems below the Loch Ness that wouldn't show up on sonar scans. Despite all the legends and rumors of Nessie's lair, the bottom of the Loch Ness is very flat.
Not a cave or an indentation in sight.
Adrian Shine has provided a new and rather compelling theory about the Loch Ness Monster's identity. A giant sturgeon, a fish that can grow to be well over 10 feet long. Sturgeons are known to be spotted along the coast of Scotland and even near the entrance of the River Ness that feeds the Loch Ness.
Here's the head of a very large sturgeon, to give you an idea of the proportions.
But Adrian Shine isn't even satisfied with his own theory. Sturgeons are big, but they're slow swimmers. Many reports of the Loch Ness Monster describe it being very quick and able to disappear beneath the surface of the water in an instant. Another simple but also very likely theory is that the Loch Ness Monster is just boats or waves caused by boats. Because of how narrow the Loch Ness is, a boat disappears from sight pretty quickly, but the wakes it leaves behind stay on the surface of the water long after the boat is gone. However, among all the sightings of Nessie that appear to just be the wakes left by boats, there is one that experts haven't been able to dismiss, and they've had 40 years to do it. This is called the Dinsdale film, named after the man who took the video. For decades, this has been hailed as the best evidence of a prehistoric presence being in the lake. Tim Dinsdale was an aeronautical engineer who arrived at the Loch Ness on April 23rd of 1960. He brought with him his 16mm camera. Dinsdale was driving along the side of the loch when he saw something moving through the water, creating a wake of its own. He watched it through his binoculars, and he was certain he was watching some kind of unknown giant creature speeding along the surface of the lake. His short bursts of video became some of the most compelling and puzzling pieces of film surrounding the Loch Ness Monster lore. The reports at the time concluded that whatever it was most likely animate, meaning it wasn't a man-made object. It was something organic, something alive, some kind of animal, some kind of creature. However, there is a speck of white that appears in this video that has discredited this piece of evidence in the eyes of some. It was believed that this was just a speck of dust that appeared when the film was developed, but modern technology has proven that that isn't the case. Whatever this speck of white is, it wasn't just a fault in the film because it appears in more than just one frame. However, to this day, experts cannot say with 100% certainty what is in that video. They can't say if it's an unknown creature, a flock of birds, a seal, a boat, they don't know.
I couldn't put my hand on my heart and say 100% whether it's a creature, a natural object, or a boat being driven away from me. I could not do that.
So, take that however you want. There's been a lot of instances like this where there's something moving along the surface of the lake that looks like it might be Nessie, but it's easily disproven as something else. Boats are common, but a flock of birds can also look like something in the shape of a Loch Ness monster. There's even this video where at first you see a long serpent-like body moving through the water with a long neck and a small head protruding from the water, but as the video goes on, it's revealed to be a flock of birds, viewed at just the right angle to look like one might think is the shape of a Loch Ness monster. So, I personally don't believe in the Loch Ness monster in the way of it being a new, giant, undiscovered species. I don't think it's a plesiosaur. There's just too much evidence that goes against that. The sonar scans turned up nothing, not even like a cave system for them to hide in, and there's not enough food to support a population to live exclusively in the loch, and there's no way we don't have more photographic evidence if a giant 500-pound lizard is swimming up and down the river in and out of the ocean. I don't think this supposed monster is just one thing. I think it's a combination of a bunch of misidentified objects. Driftwood, seals, birds, otters, seals, sturgeon fish, all of these are very likely suspects for sightings and photos. But like, it's really fun to think about like a giant lizard just living in this lake, swimming around under boats, like around people, you know? So like, I get it. So I tried to get as much in there as I could. I didn't want to go picking apart every little sighting and every little picture of a bird that looks like it might be a monster at just the right angle. I wanted to keep it interesting and objective with science side on it as well, so hopefully it was that and enjoyable as well. Anyways, thank you guys for being patient with me. I have actually been still gaining subscribers even though I haven't posted for a lot of months. It's actually mainly my Terraria video that is still getting me views. My other videos aren't as big, which is like totally fine. I don't want to be a big YouTuber. That's just a lot of pressure, and I like not having a schedule, and like I said before, I don't want to force myself to make these videos because that takes all the joy out of it for me, and then you don't want to watch someone who's miserable and doesn't care about their channel. That's just not fun for anybody. So, you know, I'm happy being a small YouTuber, so thank you for being patient with me and like sticking in there with me, and yeah, I just appreciate it, and thank you for watching. Now that I'm settled in my new place and like I have my setup and everything, I'll hopefully be uploading a bit more. Most likely I won't be doing videos as long as this because they're quite a struggle, not a struggle, but it's quite a long process for me to write the script and then sit down and film and then also edit these and get all of like the footage and stuff that I use in these and all that stuff. It's a long process, and the smaller videos are easier to put out. I know that people tend to enjoy the longer videos more, but I'll try and mix it up a bit so you have shorter videos as well as longer videos, and it's more fun for me to switch it up like that as well. So the next one might be just a shorter video, and it's just something to kind of get back into the swing of things as well. I actually filmed this video at my old place like a long time ago. I don't know what happened, but something was wrong with the audio in it. I'm not sure if I still had videos or if I deleted them, but something was wrong with the audio where I couldn't use any of it.
He figured no one believed him or they would make fun of him back in 1870.
But anyway, I think it turned out better this way anyway. I'm not sure if this will be my background for filming all the time. I don't really have a proper setup. I'm just using mostly natural light now, which is very nice. So I'll most likely keep this background setup. Everything you see is a real plant, by the way. I don't have any fake plants, so that's real, that tree is real, that's real. These are all real, and they're a lot to keep up with. Just one last time, I'm going to plug my Instagram and Twitter. For those who don't understand why I do that, as an actor, a lot of what my job is just exposure. So in the acting world, if you have more followers, whether you're a better actor or not, sometimes you're more likely to get that role because you have 1,000 followers, that's 1,000 people who will watch that show potentially just because you're in it. Versus if you have 300 followers, that's only 300 more people that are going to come to the show because of it. So following me on Instagram, engaging with me on social media, it actually helps me out in my acting career. And like, my acting career is the world for me. That's all I want to do. This is my hobby, but that's my life. You know what I mean? So a follow or a like on Instagram, it helps me and I appreciate it a lot. So thank you if you do that. But if you just watch these videos as well, thank you for that too. I appreciate that too. This is my hobby. I enjoy doing it. So if you enjoy receiving it as much as I enjoy creating it, I'm happy, you know? So thank you again. So anyway, yeah, I'll see you in my next video. Thank you again for watching and helping me out and sticking with me through these long pauses. Bye.
Oh, Mr. Backward, don't you know?